What would you do if you discovered the new Pope has African-American blood and a family history that challenges everything you thought you knew about the Catholic Church? In May 2025, when white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel and Robert Francis Prevost was announced as Pope Leo XIV, the world celebrated the election of the first American to occupy the throne of St. Peter. But behind this simple headline lies a far more complex and fascinating story. The Catholic Church, torn between tradition and reform, between conservatives and progressives, is now led by a man whose multiple identities reflect the tensions and contradictions of the modern world. A man who isn't just American, but also Peruvian, not merely white but with documented African-American roots, not only traditional but also a reformer. In this video, I will reveal the different faces of Pope Leo XIV and how his extraordinary journey of transformation can teach us something profound about identity, belonging, and authenticity in a world desperately seeking unity. And believe me, what you're about to discover about his origins in New Orleans will completely change your perception of who the 267th Pope of the Catholic Church really is. The American Face. Imagine the streets of Chicago in the mid-1950s, a city in transformation, vibrant and contradictory. Here in 1955, Robert Francis Prevost was born, a boy who would one day become the spiritual leader of more than 1 billion people around the world. The son of a devout Catholic family, with grandparents of Spanish and Franco-Italian origins, young Robert grew immersed in the faith he would one day lead. What few know is that his childhood as an altar boy in Chicago profoundly shaped his worldview. In Prevost's own words, "I was raised in a very Catholic family with parents very engaged in the parish." This deep connection to the American Catholic community was not just about faith, but identity. An identity that, as we'll see, is more complex than it appears. Chicago, the windy city, known for its grand architecture and immigrant history, left indelible marks on the future pope. Ethnic diversity, racial tensions, the fight for social justice. This was the backdrop where young Robert formed his consciousness. Ordained in 1982, he seemed destined for a traditional ecclesiastical career in the US. But destiny, or divine providence as the faithful would say, had other plans for Robert Prevost. 3 years after his ordination, a decision would completely change his life and the history of the church. He chose to become a missionary in Peru. What drove him to abandon the comfort of his homeland to serve in marginalized Latin American communities? What inner transformation began at that moment? This is just the first face of the man who would become Pope Leo XIV. An American face, yes, but one already sowing seeds of a much broader and more universal identity. And as we reflect on our own roots and how they define us, I ask, to what extent do our origins determine who we are? And how can we, like Prevost, transcend them without denying them? The Latin American Face, 1985, Peru. A country marked by extreme contrasts, the natural beauty of the Andes, the cultural richness of an ancient civilization, but also poverty, inequality, and social conflict. It was in this setting that Robert Prevost arrived as a missionary, unaware this land would become his second homeland. Picture a young American priest, still learning Spanish, immersed in a reality completely different from Chicago. What began as a temporary mission became a lifelong commitment. Prevost not only learned the language, he became fluent in Spanish, but also deeply absorbed Peruvian culture. In Trujillo in the north, he spent 10 years as a parish priest and seminary teacher, forming new priests and building bridges between communities. He was no longer just an American in Peru, but someone who gradually became part of that people. In 2015, a symbolic yet deeply meaningful gesture, he obtained Peruvian citizenship. He was no longer just a foreign missionary, but an adopted son of that nation. As one colleague put it, he was known for working with marginalized people and fully immersing himself in the Spanish language and local culture. This total cultural immersion is rare, even among dedicated missionaries, and reveals something fundamental about the character of the future Pope. When Pope Francis appointed him Bishop of Chiclayo in 2014, Prevost was already considered both American and Peruvian. This cultural duality, this genuine ability to belong to two very different worlds, is one of the most fascinating traits of the current pontiff. Remember how I mentioned his multiple identities at the start? This is the second face of Pope Leo XIV, the Latin American face that complements rather than contradicts his original American identity. This leads us to a profound question. Is it truly possible to belong to more than one culture, more than one identity? How can we, in an increasingly globalized yet divided world, build bridges between different realities without losing our authenticity? Prevost's example suggests yes, it's possible, but it requires radical openness to the other, a willingness to be transformed by encounter. If you're enjoying this video on the multiple faces of Pope Leo XIV, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more content, exploring the fascinating stories behind the great figures of our time. And now, get ready for the most surprising revelation about the current pontiff. The African-American Face, New Orleans, Louisiana, a city known for its rich multicultural history, music, cuisine, and its secrets. This is where we find one of the most amazing revelations about Pope Leo XIV, a face of his identity that remained virtually unknown until recently. Genealogical research led by Louisiana historian Jari Honora found that the Pope's maternal grandparents have strong ties to New Orleans' black community. Official records don't mention it, but documents recently uncovered reveal something extraordinary. The Pope's grandparents are described as black or mulatto in New Orleans historical records. They lived in the iconic French Quarter, in a Pontalba building, part of the city's heritage. But when the family moved to Chicago, something significant happened. Their racial identity was recorded as white, a common practice among light-skinned black families seeking to escape segregation. This phenomenon, known as racial passing, was a painful but common part of American history. African-descended families with light enough skin to pass, as white often concealed, their backgrounds to access opportunities denied to black people. The Pope himself likely grew up unaware of this part of his family history, or perhaps aware, but recognizing the silence as a survival tactic. As historian Honora noted about the Pope's origins, this indicates that American stories, the experiences of our ancestors, are more closely intertwined than we might imagine. It narrows the distance between Rome and New Orleans, or New Orleans and Chicago. This revelation isn't just a genealogical curiosity. It's a powerful symbol of the complexity of American identity and, by extension, of human identity. Think for a moment about the profound meaning of this. The leader of the Catholic Church, an institution often criticized for its Eurocentrism, has African-American blood in his veins, a bloodline steeped in a history of struggle, resistance, and unwavering faith. It isn't just a historical irony. It may be a sign of the times, a sign that old categories and divisions are being transcended in ways we've barely begun to understand. And it prompts us to ask, how many other stories of interwoven, complex identities remain hidden in our society? What do we lose when we insist on simplistic identity categories? The social reformer face. It's time to move from words to action. This forceful statement from then Cardinal Prevost on climate change, made in 2024, provides a window into another crucial face of the current Pope, the social reformer. By choosing the name Leo, he signaled a commitment to pressing social issues that cannot be ignored. But what exactly does this name mean in papal tradition? The first pontiff, named Leo, whose papacy ended in 461, is remembered for meeting Attila the Hun and persuading him not to attack Rome, a powerful symbol of diplomacy and peacemaking. The last Pope Leo XIII, who served from 1878 to 1903, wrote an influential treatise on workers' rights, Rerum Novarum, which laid the foundation for modern Catholic social teaching. As former Archbishop Sion Patrick O'Malley of Boston noted, he chose a name widely associated with Pope Leo XIII's legacy of social justice, who led during a time of great upheaval in the world. Pope Leo XIV's positions on contemporary issues reflect this legacy. On climate change, he has not only spoken about the need for action, but advocated concrete measures at the Vatican, including installing solar panels and adopting electric vehicles. He's called humanity to build a reciprocal relationship with the environment, a phrase echoing Laudato Si by his predecessor, Pope Francis. Regarding immigration, a particularly sensitive issue in the US, his stance has been clear and consistent. A social media account in his name shared a critical article stating, "Catholics cannot support rhetoric that demonizes immigrants as dangerously criminal simply because they cross the border in search of a better life for themselves and their families." This put him at odds with figures like US Vice President J.D. Vance, especially after Vance's controversial remarks. On women's participation in the Church, Leo XIV supported Francis's decision to allow women to join the dicastery for bishops for the first time. On several occasions, we have seen that her perspective is an enrichment, he declared in 2023. A year later, he stated that female presence contributes significantly to the discernment process in selecting the best candidates to serve the Church in episcopal ministry. These positions raise profound questions about balancing tradition and reform in the Catholic Church. How can a millennia-old institution adapt to contemporary urgencies without losing its essence? And for each of us, how can we honor our traditions while responding to the challenges of our time? Pope Leo XIV's example suggests it's not about choosing past or future, but finding in the past the resources to face the future. Before we explore Leo XIV's other faces, please share this video with someone interested in a deep analysis of the leader of the Catholic Church. And don't forget to turn on notifications for our next investigative content. The Diplomat Face. Imagine. The scene, February 2025, Vatican. Cardinal Robert Prevost shares a quiet moment with Pope Francis. A photograph captures this instant. Two men of faith, one older and frail, the other about to assume one of the world's most influential roles. They didn't know yet that in a few months, Prevost would be elected to succeed Francis as leader of the Catholic Church. This image perfectly symbolizes another essential face of Pope Leo XIV, the diplomat, the bridge builder. Throughout his ecclesiastical career, Prevost demonstrated a remarkable ability to navigate between different and often conflicting worlds. As prefect of the dicastery for bishops, he played the crucial role of selecting and overseeing bishops worldwide, a key function requiring extraordinary diplomatic sensitivity and understanding of the Church's complex local dynamics. A former colleague, the Reverend John Lydon, described him as outgoing, down-to-earth, and very concerned for the poor. This combination, accessibility, pragmatism, compassion, forms the foundation of his diplomatic approach. Not cold, calculated geopolitics, but diplomacy rooted in human and spiritual values. As Pope Leo XIV faces the monumental challenge of uniting a deeply divided Church. On one side are conservative Catholics resistant to change. On the other, progressives eager for faster and deeper reforms. His position on blessings for same-sex couples illustrates his diplomatic approach. He supported Francis's decree permitting such blessings, yet added that bishops must interpret these guidelines according to local contexts and cultures, a nuance acknowledging the global diversity of the Church. This ability to find balance between seemingly irreconcilable positions isn't a political skill only. It's a spiritual expression, valuing unity in diversity. As he said in his first papal address, "United and hand in hand with God, let us move forward together." This simple phrase encapsulates his approach, not uniformity, but walking together despite differences. This leads to a broader reflection on leadership in polarized times. How can we, in our spheres of influence, build bridges instead of walls? How can we, like Leo XIV, honor different perspectives without losing sight of core values? Perhaps the most important lesson from this face of the Pope is that true diplomacy isn't about empty compromises. It's about finding deeper common ground beneath our superficial divisions. The spiritual face. Behind all the faces we've explored, the American, the Latin American, the man with African-American roots, the social reformer, the diplomat, lies a deeper, more fundamental dimension, the spiritual face of Pope Leo XIV. Because before being a global leader, a reformer or a diplomat, Robert Prevost is a man of faith, a follower of Christ, a member of the Augustinian order with a rich inner life. In his early moments as Pope, Leo XIV spoke fondly of his predecessor. We still hear in our ears the faint yet always courageous voice of Pope Francis, who blessed us. This spiritual continuity, a sense of belonging to a living tradition that transcends any individual, is central to his identity. As an Augustinian, he inserts himself into a spiritual lineage stretching back to St. Augustine, one of Christian history's most influential theologians. Augustinian spirituality, with its emphasis on interiority, the search for truth and love as a transformative force, seems to deeply shape Leo XIV's vision. When he speaks of building a reciprocal relationship with the environment, or of women's importance in the church, we hear echoes of an Augustinian vision of an interconnected world, where all creatures reflect in some way the divine presence. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Leo XIV's spirituality is how it integrates his multiple identities. In a world that often forces us to choose between different facets of who we are, his spiritual journey seems to have been one of integration, not fragmentation. American and Peruvian, traditional and reformist, rooted in diverse heritages, yet on a unified mission. These apparent contradictions resolve in the deeper unity of his spiritual identity. This offers us a powerful lesson on authenticity. In an era of fragmented identities and compartmentalized lives, Pope Leo XIV's example suggests true authenticity isn't about reducing who we are to a single dimension, but integrating our multiple facets into a coherent whole. It's not about choosing between different faces, but recognizing that together they form who we truly are. So I ask, how can we, in our own journey, integrate the different dimensions of our identity? How can we, like Leo XIV, embrace the complexity of who we are without losing ourselves in fragmentation? Perhaps the answer lies in finding, as he seems to have found, a spiritual center from which all other dimensions gain meaning and coherence. The multiple faces of Pope Leo XIV aren't contradictions, but a testament to the complexity of human identity in a transforming world. From Chicago to Rome via Peru, and carrying the hidden legacy of New Orleans, Robert Prevost embodies a journey of integration that defies our simplistic categories and artificial divisions. The first American pope, with Peruvian citizenship and African-American roots, a social reformer, a bridge builder, invites us to rethink what authenticity means in a world of fluid identities. His story reminds us that we are all in some way bearers of multiple heritages, influences, and possibilities. At a moment when polarization threatens to fragment our societies, Leo XIV's integrative figure offers a powerful counterpoint. It is possible to honor different traditions, embrace different identities, and still maintain a unified, coherent vision. It is possible to be faithful to our roots while opening to new realities. If this video sparked your interest in the complex identities shaping our religious leaders and society, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Soon, we'll bring an equally deep analysis of other controversial religious figures whose stories challenge our conventional perceptions. And I leave you with a final question for reflection. In a world constantly pressuring us to simplify who we are, to choose a side, an identity, a face, how can we, following Pope Leo XIV's example, embrace the fullness of who we are? How, Can we transform our apparent contradictions not into sources of conflict, but into sources of richness and authenticity?
Histórico que todos estamos à espera, ver aparecer aquele que é o novo Papa, que agora saúda as pessoas.
Para a multidão na Praça São Pedro, de fiéis e peregrinos, com um belo sorriso, retribui o entusiasmo dos presentes neste momento, execução das notas do hino pontifício.
E quem sabe lá
69 anos.
Por que escolheu esse
Prevost.
nome?
Leão XIV.
Leão XIV, por ser bom beneditino, não? É interessante, porque isso nos chama agora todos nós de irmos de novo pensar.
E o nome traz um programa de vida?
Sim, o nome traz sempre um programa de vida, sim. Podemos ver ele agora de perto, quase todo emocionado.
Muita emoção.
Já